Okay, so welcome, Jade, Ivy, and Anders, although Anders is not physically here with us. So can you all give an introduction of yourself?
Hi, I'm Anders. I take, or rather used to take, the IB diploma with Chinese A language and literature, chemistry, and maths applications at standard level, and English A literature, history, and biology at higher level. I currently have a confirmed place at New College, Oxford for law, or in other words, as it's known formally as BA jurisprudence, with a standard conditional offer with 38 points with triple sixes at higher level.
Right. Hi, I'm Ivy. I do IB, obviously, and my PG was 42. My higher levels are chemistry, biology, English B, and MAA, and then my standard level subjects are Chinese A and history. I have a conditional offer from Jesus College in Oxford to study PPL, and I'm doing the psychology and philosophy course, and my final grade was 43.
Hi, I'm Jade. I used to take the IB, and I took higher levels of English A literature, history, and biology, and my standard level subjects are chemistry, mathematics application and interpretation, and Chinese. I got accepted into Oxford Hertford College for reading history with a standard conditional offer of 38 points, with 666 in my higher level subjects.
Great, thank you all. And the second question would be, how did you choose what you wanted to study in university, since I know usually you don't get to change your major during the 3 years of your course?
So why choose law? That's a very interesting question. I guess there are lots of reasons, and if I were to go on about it, this would probably be very long. But basically, I've always been interested in the role of law in our society, right? How it regulates human behavior and how it, creates a contract between government and the people, and how, a system of laws in some form or another in terms of rules or edicts or whatever, has always existed in some form since, civilization, I guess, or formal human civilization anyways. And I think also the practical elements of law, are also something I'm really interested in. So it's just, I think, something that's really fascinating and really current and really relevant to our daily life, and that's why, I chose law.
So I chose psychology and philosophy because, originally when I was in Form 5, I wanted to do med, but then I already knew I wanted to specialize in psychiatry med, and then as I sort of did more activities, I sort of realized that maybe the medicine path isn't quite the right career for me, but I was still interested in psychology, so I decided to apply to it in the UK. The reason for psychology and philosophy was because I really liked theorizing about random stuff, and philosophy is really interesting to me. So because Oxford offers this course, I decided I'd just try it because it's because Oxford also offers experimental psychology, but I like the idea of sort of intercorrelating two different subjects and sort of playing them off each other.
So interdisciplinary studies.
Basically, sort of, yeah.
Okay, great. Jade?
So Ivy, I thought of doing medicine when I was Form 4. Specifically, I wanted to do dermatology. But then I just realized that sometimes what you like doesn't necessarily mean that you're good at it. And so in a more realistic sense, I started to think of other options. And I know that I'm better at humanities than I am at science, so I decided to go for something that I was good at, and coincidentally, I liked history very much, and I think it is also to do with the way I am as a person. I tend to be more creative and more imaginative, and so for me, studying history has always been reading a storybook, and I envisioned different countries being toddlers in a kindergarten just fighting over nations, and I thought that was a very interesting outlook to it, so I decided to kind of pursue it on a tertiary level. And I feel history is very important too, because technically speaking, a lot of our government structures, political structures, and the way society functions has a lot to do with our culture, and this could also be found in history.
Great. And then relating to your intended majors already, what did you write about in your UCAS essay?
So the main point of UCAS personal statement is for, the interviewers or the admissions tutors to get to know you a bit better, know about your motivations for studying a subject before you actually get there for an interview. So with that in mind, I mainly wrote about three things. Firstly, why I'm interested in law and where that interest came from. Secondly, I talked a bit about my personal readings and, a bit about what I think the law should be about, or, what it is, how it is right now. Thirdly, I talked about my, extracurricular interests and, the different internships or activities I might have done and how that relates to my interest in the law. And that mainly, all of that comes back to ultimately, again, to have the interviewer know you, or the admissions tutors know you a bit better, so they're interested in having you for an interview with them. Yeah, so those are the things I wrote about.
Right, so for my UCAS essay, I wrote about a lot of readings because psychology and philosophy is it's very hard to find practical work, like in other fields like medicine or vet or stuff. But then I also wrote about, my experience shadowing a psychiatrist from, my med days. But mostly I talked about the readings I've done and, my thoughts and opinions on those readings and how I think they link together in specific areas of psychology I'm interested in. I think, for essays, it's good to, for UCAS essays, it's good to sort of go in a little bit of depth with your opinion or, your analysis of certain topics that you're interested in, and not just, fully stick to, for instance, the most cliche topics.
I wrote my UCAS essay on basically, the readings I've did, as well as, essays that I submitted for competitions. So, because I study history, I submitted essays for, competitions, for the Robson History Prize, and at the same time, I also discussed a lot about my extended essay, which I also did on history. And at the same time, I also talked about, the academic lectures I attended that I think has, a correlation to what I'm going to study in university. And I think what's important to write about is at the same time, I think even if you talk about, the readings you have, I think it's very crucial for you to actually, like Ivy said, analyze what has been said to you. And in fact, I did challenge a lot of things in my personal statement. And so I think that aspect perhaps intrigued the interviewing tutors to ask me a lot.
Yeah, and more on the UCAS essay. So in specific, what books or content did you study before writing the essay? So in preparation of it. And did you refer to the reading list that they gave you, if there was one?
So I think the word books in that question is slightly misleading. One must recognize that the UCAS personal statement is 4,000 characters maximum. 4,000 characters roughly translates into 650, maybe 700 words if you're super concise and use really short words, and you don't use multisyllabic words. So with that in mind, I only had time, or space rather, to write about one book. So I wrote about Lord Bingham, the famous English jurists, the Rule of Law. So it's a book, basically. It's quite a slim volume. I'd recommend you to check that out. And that's mainly the book I consulted because I think it segues really well into the sort of discussion I was trying to have in my personal statement. In terms of the reading list, there is a reading list, of course, and I did refer to reading lists. But the books in the reading list are extremely long, and since everyone has access to the reading list, I guess from my point of view, I wanted to show the interviewer that I had, not only read the reading list, but rather had, sort of extended interest beyond whatever was offered, by the faculty in terms of what they recommended, and that's why I wrote about something else. And in terms of other content, I mainly wrote about how my extracurriculars and how that worked in with that. So I talked about cases I'd studied for moot court and various other things like that, or the course at the online courses I took, or the internship I did, and all the things I learned from that. So that's mainly the other content I covered, just to show a breadth of, not breadth of experience, but rather a very broad interest in the law.
Right. Okay. So I agree with Anders that it's a bit of a misleading question, but I also think his is a bit of a misleading answer. Like, in my opinion, because like I think the reading list is sort of there for like you to like it recommends books for you to check out if you're interested in a particular topic, but it doesn't necessarily tell you to read these in preparation for like your interview or your subject. It's sort of like if you have the idea of studying this subject, you can check out these books and see if it's really what you want to study. And I did check out some of the books in the reading list, and I did use some of them because I already read them before, but like as I said, I don't think it's very good to use like a lot of reading list books because it's a bit cliche and like it's sort of expected that you'll read similar stuff. But like in my essay, I talked about one of the books in the reading list, but I also talked about like other books that I've read in my own time. So I think in your essay you can bring up books you've read on the reading list, but it might be better to offer like a very personal or like interesting opinion on those books, or show a really deep understanding, or even like go from those books and use what you learn from them to give better opinions on other books that may not be on the reading list. Because if your personal essay utilizes different content to create the essay, it'll stand out more and it won't sort of be very cookie cutter reading list provided content.
Great. And Jade?
Yeah, I agree with both Anders and Ivy about the reading list. I mean, I did look through the reading list when I wrote my UCAS essay, but I ended up not referring to any of them. It's simply because I actually referred to a lot of books that I personally read, and the reason I did that was because I was very, very, very familiar with it. Like, I did my extended essay, my IA topic, my essays for like the competitions on these books. So I am quite confident when I wrote that to ensure that in case I have an interview, like I would know what I'm talking about, and I know like what kind of arguments I would make to challenge them that would be more sensible. I mean, it's good to like refer to the reading list if you're trying to figure out whether you like this subject or not. But then, the both people that I mentioned before, it's cliche and it's very generic. And I still think like even though the UK academic tutors are more rigid in terms of their style and flair compared to the US, I do think they want to find like a spark or a wow in your personal statement. And if you don't have that aspect, then I guess you don't have much to like capture their interest in you.
So a way of standing out would be quoting your own readings, like outside of the reading list.
Yes.
Yeah, but then at the same time, don't just randomly quote something.
Like if you quote something, you have to make sure you understand it, because there's always a risk of them asking you, and then you're just coming up empty and go like, oh, actually I only saw like this one line and I put it down because I thought it sounded cool.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
That's not great.
Exactly. Like you can't just tell the interviewer like I did that just for the looks of it. Like clearly, if you're not familiar with the topic, they would like quite quickly see through it. And then you'll make a fool out of yourself. So don't do that. Highly not recommend that unless you want to fail.
Okay, great advice. And then the next question would be moving on to the interview. So how did you prepare for the interview?
So, interview and interview preparation. Well, firstly, I'd note that you need to be invited for an interview first, and of course there's an extra step called an admissions test before that, and that's subject specific, so we're not going to go too deep into that. But when I was invited for an interview, I did a few things. Firstly, I looked at videos of interviews on the internet. There are a lot on YouTube from the various Oxford colleges, from the faculties themselves, or from open day sites, or and I also watched Cambridge interviews because they are formatted really, really similarly. The second thing I looked at, and I think this is something not a lot of people pay attention to, and usually ignore or miss, is that certain colleges, some colleges, not all of them, they do put general summaries of what they expect from the interview on their websites, and usually every year after each admissions round they usually have brief sort of comment section about what applicants could have done better, what they basically statistics and things like that. I looked at those and I found them really quite helpful as to giving me an idea of what I was supposed to do. The third thing I did, and this is another thing people don't really expect, but it was that I looked back at my personal statement and I reviewed everything I wrote and made sure that I was well versed in the stuff I'd written, because well, it could have come up in my interview, and it ended up being in all of my interviews. So I basically did those three things, and the interview went like it was supposed to. There was a brief, introduction. We talked a bit about personal statement, and they basically gave me some problems to solve. Well, not maths problems, but sort of legal-ish problems with like a text and answering questions about a text. So that was more or less it. It went like it was supposed to.
Okay, so I actually had 2 sets of interviews, like 4 in total, because our interviews, like we pick our college, right? And then our college gives us an offer, but then like a second college will also interview us as well to see if they want us, if like the first college doesn't want us. Because I did philosophy and psychology as like 2 subjects in 1 subject, I had 4 interviews. I mostly prepared by going through my PS again. I went through the readings I did in my PS and sort of took notes on them. And I also got like my senior who's already studying at Oxford in the same subject to sort of ask me about like my PS and also some interview questions, mostly because my interview was focusing on how, like, my subject focuses very much on how I process information and how I sort of create knowledge, to use a TOK term. So like I made my friends talk to me about random stuff, and I sort of tried to regroup the information and produce like hypotheses and theories out of it. But then in the end, in the interview, they didn't actually ask me about my PS. So that was really disappointing in the interview, because I'm not allowed to say specifics, I think. Yeah. But for my subject, I don't know if this is true across the board, but they gave me like thought experiments and like case studies to sort of draw conclusions from, because I think it's because they want to see how I think and how I solve problems. This is also really common for a lot of subjects, not like all of them, but most of them will probably do something similar. So I think it's also good to prepare for your interview by sort of checking out maybe famous experiments or watching like lectures on YouTube to sort of refresh your brain and reload it.
Right?
So the way I prepared my interview was I really tried to read through all of my written work and my personal statement. And I'm very lucky because like that ended up being what my entire interview was on. And so, but at the same time, like I also tried to look into the news about like recent topics, like perhaps relating to like politics or like society or the culture in general, internationally, because I was kind of scared that they might ask about it, which they didn't. But I would suggest trying to like look through it to gain a deeper sense of understanding and knowledge on like whatever you're studying. And at the same time, I asked like my family friends to actually converse with me intellectually on like the topics that I wrote on my personal statement, and I really, really, really had to like beg them to challenge me to not necessarily insult me, but just in general to like kind of try and cut off like my answers and challenge what I said to get a sense of like what I should be expecting in the interview. Of course, everybody's experience regarding the interview will be different. Mine was super nice, super friendly, but at the same time, I heard others for the interviewing tutors were super challenging and kind of haughty in a sense. And at the same time, I also prepared my interview by looking in the mirror and talk, because I get very nervous when I'm in like these formal occasions, and I tend to stutter a lot, which I might have in this like podcast, and that's when I get anxious. And so like by looking in the mirror, I try to like see my facial features and see my facial expressions, and to kind of anticipate, even though if the interviewing tutors throw me like this ridiculous question that I possibly could not even understand, my face will remain composed so that they wouldn't know that I am crying internally.
Okay, great. Okay, and then I think this also stems from the last question. What is some advice that you don't usually hear, but people should know about if they're about to go into an interview?
What advice which I had about the interview, or things in general? Well, I think I was very well advised by the school careers counsellor, Miss Liang, so special shout out for her. She was brilliant and she gave lots of wonderful advice. You should definitely seek out your school careers counsellor, no matter where you're from. If you're from the same school as I am, and you'd probably know who I am if you are, look for Miss Liang. Okay, she's really helpful. I think one bit of advice though, for everyone, and it's something I wish I was told more about, is that many people have an expectation that you need to have to spend money on preparing for your application, be that, the interview or, admissions test or your personal statement. The simple fact is that you don't, because there are a lot of resources available online. What you really need to do is to know how to find and apply those resources. So that's, the advice I wish I had. I was quite panicked about the fact that I'd spent $0 and, quite frankly, I shouldn't have been.
Okay, my advice would probably be to maybe look into the people who are interviewing you, because you get the tutor list 2 days in advance, a while in advance. So it would be really good to look up their areas of study. For instance, my philosophy interviewers, one of them did, I think, moral psychology, and the other did cognitive. And so I sort of looked into their areas, and while they didn't really ask me the stuff I thought they might ask given their research areas, for my philosophy interviews, they did ask something similar to what their areas of interest were. So I think that sort of seeing what your tutors, the interviewing tutors might ask you, would let you prepare a little bit for what kinds of questions might come up. And I also agree with Anders, you really don't need to spend a lot of money on interview prep. You can just get a friend to, as Jade said, intellectually challenge your answers. And that gives get a really snarky friend.
And a smart one.
Yeah. And then just tell them to be full on sarcastic and critical of everything you say. And that's actually pretty good practice already, I think.
I actually have a question. Why can't you just argue with yourself?
Because it's harder to find the flaws in your own argument, right? Because you want yourself to be correct. So if you're trying to find the flaws in your argument, and especially because it's verbally, you probably forget what you say, and while you're trying to find the flaws, you already lost the plot of what you're saying. So it's better to have someone to bounce ideas off of, and especially because other people will have different perspectives, which will be really helpful in order for you to sort of understand what kind of gaps your answers might have.
Okay.
I think many people get this wrong, is that during the interview they have to be very quick when responding to the interview questions. I would say don't. I mean, it's not good if you just awkwardly stare at them after a question has been asked. And it's okay if you don't know. Literally, some of the questions that I wasn't sure if I answered it correctly. But the thing is, there's no right or wrong answers. They just really want to look at your thought process. Because mainly, I think what people tend to forget is that the interview is really about the tutors looking for people that they think are teachable. And I think during the interview, if you demonstrate to them the way you think, the way you put facts together, and how you challenge perhaps different kind of ideas or notions, I think it's a very good way to illustrate that you're fit for that college, or in general Oxford. And if you really don't know a question and you're really trying to think very quickly, I would suggest perhaps saying a very generic line and say oh, I'm not quite sure about this, but blah 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 blah. Just give yourself some time to think and collect your thoughts before saying them out loud. Because if you don't, then everything you say is going to be messy, unstructured, and scattered around, and it'll be very hard for both you and the interviewing tutors to understand, and it's not going to look good on you.
And to add on to Jade's thoughts, it's kind of okay to say I don't know, but you have to phrase it as I don't know, but and then I think what I heard, one of the tips I heard from my seniors is that you can sort of talk about the stuff you aren't sure about, what you don't understand, but what you think could be possible, what you think could be possible answers or solutions. Walk them through your thought process verbally instead of fixating on the correct answer, because in a lot of situations there might not even be a correct answer. They just kind of want to see how you would react to questions and how you would solve problems.
Okay, good. So to go back a bit, this is about your before you even write your UCAS essay, perhaps. So how did you choose the college that you wanted to attend? Because I know Oxford has a lot, right?
Yeah, it was pretty hard to choose a college. At first Because there are colleges sort of known for subjects in Oxford, at first I was kind of choosing between Christchurch and Jesus because Christchurch is where my senior went and he said it was pretty good. But in the end, I decided on Jesus College because I was prepping for like my thinking skills assessment aptitude test, and then they had a lot of really helpful videos on their YouTube channel, and I thought it seemed like a pretty good place for me to study my subject because it seemed like they would have a pretty good support system or a lot of students with similar interests there. So I kind of just picked it because of the YouTube channel.
Wow. Okay.
So, the way I chose my college was not far from the idea that Ivy was getting at. My college has a bridge, and it's called a Bridge of Sighs. And so when I was Googling the Oxford universities and their different colleges, I was like very captured by that particular bridge. But then even back then, I didn't make up my mind yet. I even tried to look for like the references that Ms. Liang gave, which was like the list of universities, the list of colleges that our senior students went in terms of studying for Oxford. But even then, I wasn't quite sure about it. And so I ultimately Googled like the map, like the Oxford map, to see where like different colleges would be located at. And then my college was located at the city center. And I like to be at the city center. And so therefore, logically speaking, I chose my college because of like the convenience that I think I would get like once if I got in. So yeah, I chose that. And also the bridge. The bridge is really pretty. Take pictures if you go there.
Jade is a food blogger, if you didn't know. So, yeah.
So my case is a bit different from Ivy's and Jade's in the sense that I didn't choose my own college. I was pulled there. Pull with an O, by the way. And what that means was basically I was reassigned during the admissions process. I was invited to interview by another college. I ended up being accepted by that college. So that's kind of different. I think there's statistics somewhere if you want to know about like the percentage of people who are pulled or who don't, get to their first choice college. Of course, you can also choose to, go for an open offer where, a college chooses you. But I think a few things to remember with regards to colleges now that we're on that. Like, firstly, at Oxford, at the very least, all colleges sign up to a common framework for admissions for the same course. Secondly, that, there are differences between the colleges. Like some are more equal than others in some senses. Like if it's been around longer, it's likely that's going to be richer, and therefore resourcing and stuff is different. And thirdly, that the Oxford polling system isn't the same as the Cambridge polling system. So you do want to differentiate between the two and find out more about that if you need to.
Okay, so the last question. Any final advice on college apps in general? Especially, you guys did the TSA or like the standardized tests, right?
Yeah.
Any advice on those or anything else? Yep.
Any final bits of advice? Well, I think I've got two bits of advice. Firstly, treat the admissions process holistically. You need great grades, of course, but you don't need a 45 PG, so it's important not only to have wonderful grades, but also show extracurricular interest in your subject, because obviously it's quite likely that you haven't taken the subject that you'll be studying in university and college, in secondary school in British English, and that means that you need to be able to show extracurricular interest. You should also pay attention to things like personal statements, because that's the only way in which the admissions tutors get to know you. And you also need to pay greater attention to admissions tests, because as we all know, PGs are optimistic outlooks. Occasionally they might be slightly over optimistic in some ways, and universities might be a bit skeptical. So doing well in your admissions test is a way of affirming the fact that you're really suited for that subject. Second bit of advice is that I think it's helpful to learn more about the admissions process. And what I mean by that is that try and understand the system a bit better, because I think that helps remove a lot of the panic and a lot of the uncertainty that surrounds the process. As I mentioned, I think earlier, there is feedback from, certain colleges. Feedback is available from certain colleges, publicly on the interweb. with regards to the quality of applicants and, you know, what they expect, and also statistics about applicants in general, and, you know, how the process works. I think that is really helpful in demystifying the entire process and giving you a sense of certainty about how things are going to go, you know, regardless of, you know, where you are in that process. So, you know, those are the two bits of advice I have, you know, to make your admissions process fun and, you know, educational.
Okay, so my advice. I think I'm going to talk about like picking your subjects, doing your ECAs and aptitude tests. For aptitude tests, it's actually really simple because usually online, like on their website, you can find lots of past papers. And like I really think the main way to get better at tests is to just do more of them and sort of try and figure out which parts you're weaker at and then do more of those. Because my aptitude test had an essay part, what I did was like I wrote an essay and I got my friend to read over it and sort of mark my work, and that really helped a lot. But then like back to the topic of ECAs and like picking subjects, I talked about how I wanted to do medicine in like Form 4 and 5, right? But then like thinking back, when I was interested in medicine, I was interested in like the ethics and psychiatry of medicine, so I really should have seen this coming. So my advice about subjects would probably be to sort of be more wide-read. Like, if you're not sure about what you want to study yet, you can sort of open yourself up to a wider range of possible interests. Like, you can join some activities that you really didn't think you might do. Like, for instance, I don't know, a business internship or something. Those are hard to get though, so don't take my word for it. But then like, because if you open yourself up to a wider range of activities, you'll have more ECAs to put in whatever statement you write in the end. And also you have more exposure to a wider range of possible things you might enjoy. And that'll help you land on like a subject that you'll be able to use usefully in your career and also study without dying internally.
Yep.
My advice, like similar to Ivy, like there's like the aptitude test, there's a lot of past papers you can like work on, and I highly recommend you to work on every single past paper before you go there. But at the same time, I think what's more important when you work on these past papers, like you look at the mark scheme, and because I applied for the history one, so naturally I have to do the history aptitude test, and I have to write essays on that. And essays are quite hard to have a like a very generic marks. Wait, no, not generic, like a standardized mark scheme, because like you get different sources, like some are primary, some are secondary, and my year for my history aptitude test, it was like from a fairy tale, and quite literally I have to write historically like an analytical aspect on a fairy tale basically. So that was like very shocking, but at the same time I think like if you know what the marks seem like, what in general the examiner is looking for, I think it's going to be very easy for you to work on different kinds of materials. And at the same time, I think also it's very good to have competition when you're doing like aptitude tests, because I think a competition would motivate you to be more successful and to be stronger in what you're doing at. And at the same time, I think mentality is very important. The way to approach it while applying for Oxbridge in general is just to apply it like without any hopes. Like don't get your but like don't be pessimistic or negative, but at the same time like don't kind of pressure yourself to reach a certain level of expectation and expect that you would definitely get interviewed and you would definitely be accepted, because obviously regardless of how good of an academic student you are, there's always like some kind of degree of luck to it when it comes to getting accepted by Oxford. And so I think by just treating the entire procedure, like the interview, the aptitude test, or in general, as like a experience for you, like whether or not you get in, it's very educational and very informative for you to learn from. And yeah, just take it easy.
Yeah. Like I didn't think I was gonna apply for Oxford at first because I didn't think I would be good enough to get in. Well, we saw how that went. So like, I think Jade is really right that you shouldn't put too much weight. Like, I know some people's dream school is like Oxford or Cambridge, and like they've worked their whole life towards it. But like at the same time, I don't think you should put that much weight into what school you get into, because like in the end, a lot of schools, both in Hong Kong, UK, US, Australia, they're all really good, and like your career is not going to be drastically changed because you didn't get into this one school.
Yeah.
It's better to just sort of go for it and then like play it off as like a pipe dream, and then it's better to not have as much hope as Jade said, because then when you get it back you'll be like, oh my god, I did do it, instead of, oh no, I didn't get it if you didn't, because if you don't expect to get, and you won't be devastated when you don't. That is depressing advice. I'm sorry.
It's not depressing. It's very realistic. It's like Oxbridge in general, it has a very low acceptance rate, and
Especially
so
Oxford.
yeah, exactly.
Our interview rate is so low. Like I think it was 10% interview for applications.
Yeah, so like don't like. It's good to dream big, but at the same time, like even when you're doing all these kind of stuff, I think it's good if you have a backup option, like a plan B, basically if plan A doesn't work out, because naturally life is life is going to throw at you different kinds of trials and tribulations. So I think it's very good if you can work on like that mentality and not expect anything, because then if you don't, then the reward that you receive later on will be more satisfying.
Right, but also like if you don't think you're good enough for Oxbridge, but then you have enough ECAs to write a solid statement and your PG or grades kind of meet the requirement. If you have space in your UCAS, I would honestly advise you to sort of go for it just to see if you could do it, because there's always a chance you could, and it's really good for you. It will be really good for you if you could do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, try it for fun.
Yeah,
try it for fun.
Nice. Okay, anything else to add?
Nah, I'm good.
No, I'm good.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, you two, and we'll see you listeners next time. Bye.
Bye.